The Nazi tragedy is one of the most terrible pages of the Russian history of the 20th century, a symbol of the senseless cruelty of the GULAG system. In just a few weeks between May and June 1933, 5,000 special settlers starved to death on an island in the middle of the Ob River. Many of them were victims of cannibalism. Now donations are being used to build a church in Nazin dedicated to the innocent victims of the GULAG. In the early 1930s, the Soviet Union restored its passport system, which was abolished after the revolution. Almost immediately mass arrests of passport regime violators began in cities. The campaign was initiated by the OGPU, United States Political Department, whose leadership planned in this way to increase the population of Siberia by 3 million people. The plan of Genrikh Yagoda, approved by Stalin, was formalized as a Politburo resolution on the organization of new labor settlements in Siberia, Kazakhstan and the Far East. The implementation was entrusted to the police, who seized everyone on the street who could not show a red-skinned passport sung by Mayakovsky. Those arrested were loaded into freight cars and taken to Novosibirsk, from where they were shipped north on the Ob River by barge. One day in mid-May 1933, residents of the village of Nazino saw a number of city dwellers in shabby clothes huddled together on an island across from the village. "What are you in for?" asked the guy. He answered, "No reason. I was a student in Moscow. On the weekend I went to visit my aunt from Moscow. I came to her door and knocked, but her aunt didn't have time to open the door because they grabbed me right away. I was arrested as not having my passport with me." From the memoirs of the peasant woman Feofila Belina. One day he went to Novosibirsk, went to the central market. At that time the market was surrounded, raided and arrested those who did not have their documents with them. Salnikov Kuzma Antonovich, born in 1911, from Novokuznetsk, worked in the mine, was married, had 2 children. One day he went to Novosibirsk and went to the central market. At that time, the market was surrounded, raided, and arrested those who did not have their documents with them. Everyone, including women and children, was loaded onto a barge and taken to Nazinskaya Island. There was no food. People were suffering from hunger. The guards were throwing bread as they drove past the island. Whoever grabbed it would eat it, the rest got nothing. Those who tried to escape were shot. It is unknown how long Salnikov stayed on the island, but he managed to escape. After crossing the river, he went through the swamps to the people. After his escape he worked on collective farms. From the memoirs of Vera Panova, a resident of Ust-Tim. There were all kinds of people there. During the passportization, they were rounded up by the police in Tomsk and taken to the barge. And they locked them up there. Even this Tomsk prosecutor himself came. He had 2 sons taken away. People would go out without documents, and suddenly the police raided them. The prosecutor took his sons off the island. From the memories of Alexei Vigulkin, a resident of the village of Nazino. The memories of the residents of Nazino and the surrounding villages at the end of the 1980s were recorded by the members of the expedition of the Tomsk Memorial Society, Nikolai Kandyba, Georgy Shakhtarin and Wilhelm Fast. That was in the summer of 1989. "We rented a riverboat in Tomsk and sailed north," Georgy Shakhtarin says. "When we docked at the island opposite the village of Nazino, nothing was visible because of the tall grass. When we landed on the shore we all felt a kind of consternation. Probably because we knew about the events of 1933. And so, if you don't know, it's a beautiful place, northern nature. You were the first people to ask the residents of Nazino about those events. And there were eyewitnesses still alive at the time. Were you able to get them to talk easily?" Yes, they willingly talked. After all, this is the most famous story that happened in the Alexandrovsky district during the Soviet regime. One could say it's legendary. They all called this island Ogre or Death Island. In our hut there was at that time a visiting yard. The Kolkhoz obliged us to receive passers-by. Gypsies coming, gypsies were accepted. Then I wrote a receipt, how many people there were, how many horses, and the Kolkhoz paid us. Expelled people also came to our apartment. Once we had an old lady from Smerdostrov. She was in transit. We had an entrance hall, a room, and 2 bedrooms. She was taken to the back room for the night, and I saw that the old woman had her calves cut off. When I asked her, she replied, it was cut off and roasted for me on Death Island. All the flesh on the calves had been cut off. Her legs were freezing, and the woman wrapped them with rags. She moved on her own. She looked old, but in reality she was in her early 40s. From the memoirs of Feofila Belina, a resident of the village of Nazino. How did the villagers feel about the neighborhood of such a gloomy place? Absolutely calm. They used to mow hay on the island, and the village cows would swim there across the river channel to pasture. Everybody knew what was going on there. Everywhere we were told about cases of cannibalism, but for the locals it was just a long time ago. In an interview recorded by members of the expedition, the peasant woman Maria Panova recounted. They say there was cannibalism on the island? Yes, there was. Women were tied to the laths, their breasts were cut off, they cut these spawns off. On their legs? You know, that soft spot. And they ate this meat? They roasted it on the fire and ate it. Well, there was hunger. I don't know who was guarding them, they didn't let them out, or give them work, or provide them with anything. And we had such a barricade with high gates. And why should we close them? We had 3 families living there, no cattle, nothing, the gates were never closed. When you come out in the morning, there were green fir trees, full of dead people, no place to step. Lying there like logs. So we kids are sitting there, and they're climbing out the window, I'm dying, I'm down and I'm done. From the memoirs of Alexander Naumov, a resident of the village of Ustim. Besides innocent people without documents, accidentally detained by the police, there were a lot of criminal recidivists among the special resettlers. More hardy and less scrupulous, they were the first to dare to try human meat. The funds of the Tomsk Memorial Museum investigative NKVD prison contain typewritten memoirs of Andrei Karagadin, an employee of the Alexandrovsko-Vakovskaya commandant's office, who worked on the island as a guard, and half a century later recorded from memory a scene of interrogation of one of the criminals. In the next room there was a commission from the Siblag. A respectable voice said, "Sit down," and the interrogation began. I immediately realized that they were interrogating someone who lived on the island. "Tell me, Vozdev, is it true that you knocked out the teeth of the sick and dying?" "It's true." "What for?" "To get gold crowns." "What for?" "To trade for some terry." "You want to smoke?" "And from the janitors for every crown you could get a box of matches or 2 newspapers to roll cigarettes." "So, how many teeth have you knocked out?" "I knocked out as many as I needed. Didn't put it in the stash. I used to swap it all for cigarettes, smoke them myself, and give them to my friends." "I see. And now you, a glove. Is it true that you ate human meat?" "No, it's not true. I only ate liver and heart." "Tell me how you did it, in detail." "Very simple. Like shish kebab. I made skewers out of willow twigs, sliced them, put them on skewers, and roasted them on a fire." "And what people did you get your meat from? The living or the dead?" "Why dead people? Their carcasses. I picked the ones that weren't alive anymore, but not dead yet. You can see it's coming, it'll be dead in a day or 2 anyway. It would be easier for him to die, now, right away, not to suffer for another 2 or 3 days. The GPU's crime in Nazin could have remained unsolved, who would believe the peasants' stories? If not for the investigation, which was carried out on his own initiative by Vasily Velichko, an instructor of the Narimsky District Party Committee. In July 1933, he interviewed dozens of people involved in the organization of the death camp on the island near the village of Nazino, and also recorded the testimony of local residents. Then Velichko printed out a report in 3 copies, which he sent, in Moscow, to Stalin, in Novosibirsk, to Robert Eich, in Narum, to the secretary of the district committee. After that he hid in the taiga for 6 months. 11 pages of this document of the era, declassified in the years of perestroika, were first published in the collection Special Resettlers in Western Siberia, Novosibirsk, 1994. The cold was so hard to bear that one of the labor settlers climbed into a burning hollow and died there before people's eyes. People began to die. They were burned alive by the fires while sleeping, dying of exhaustion and cold, of burns and dampness that surrounded the people. The cold was so hard to bear that one of the labor settlers climbed into a burning hollow and died there before the eyes of people who could not help him. There were no ladders or axes. In the first day after the sunny day the burial crew could bury only 295 corpses, leaving the uncollected for the second day. A new day gave a new death toll, etc. Letter from Vasily Velichko. 1933-3. Immediately after the snow and frost, the rains and cold winds began, but people were still without food. It was only on the 4th or 5th day that rye flour arrived on the island and began to be distributed to the labor settlers by several hundred grams. After receiving the flour, people ran to the water, and in their hats, slacks, jackets, and pants, they were brewing bultushka and eating it. At the same time, a huge part of them just ate the flour, since it was in powder, fell down and suffocated, dying of suffocation. Letter from Vasily Velichko. 1933-3. Commandant Suleimanov, in addition to beating people, ate sugar in front of everyone in incredibly large quantities when giving it to labor settlers and has now, according to his own statement, lost all taste. As a result of all, from 6,100 people who left Tomsk and plus to them 500 to 600 to 700 persons. It was not possible to establish accurately, transferred to Nazi sites from other commandants' offices. On August 20, 2,200 people remained. All of this, especially the island, remained an indelible mark on all the settlers. Even the worst recidivists, who had seen a lot in their time, had an indelible mark on it. The island was nicknamed Death Island or Death Island, less frequently, Cannibal Island. And the local population assimilated the name, and the rumor of what was on the island went far down and up the rivers. As proof of how much the Nazi events shook all who came into contact with them, the author of the report cites the words of folk songs composed that summer on the banks of the Ob. "It is difficult for us brothers in Narum, it's hard for all of us to die, as it was on Death Island. As we all had to see cannibals. Dear God, give me legs till spring." Velichko's comment: "The point is that people's feet are terribly swollen and still swell up. No mother will come with a fervent prayer over her son's grave to weep. Only the woods will sing their song of Narum. Will forever sing over it. From the song between the swampy marshes." Velichko's report ends with a description of the picture that was Nazinskaya Island after the evacuation of the survivors to other, more comfortable areas of the Alexandrov-Vukovsky commandant's office. "On the island there are now grasses as tall as a man. But the locals went there for berries and returned, finding corpses and huts with skeletons lying in the grass." The Tomsk expedition of Memorial in 1989 also recorded stories of old-timers who visited the island after the liquidation of the camp. When the water had already gone, there was mowing, making hay. "I used to go with the Veretinskys to the mowing. And what are they doing washing their hands? I hold my nose, my Ostyak nose, and think, what are they doing? And they take their hands, wash them, and run away again. Well, it stinks, people are decomposed, they're still up there for a month. And so they picked up the gold teeth. And they agreed to give them to Torgson. There used to be Torgson in Alexandrovsky. They took gold there. And whoever had gold would give it up. There were all sorts of nice rags, all kinds of pasta, all sorts of edibles." From the memoirs of Taizha Chakareva, a resident of Nazino, B. 1913. The Velichko letter caused a great scandal in the Central Committee apparatus and the leadership of the GPU. In the fall of 1933, a commission from the Siblag arrived in Nazino to investigate the circumstances of the mass death of special resettlers. The investigation confirmed the facts stated in the report, after which all materials were classified. The author of the report himself, when he dared to leave the taiga, was fired from his position as an instructor. Velichko went into journalism, was a war correspondent of Pravda and reached Berlin. After the war he published several novels about socialist transformations in Siberia, about the Great and Eternal, Sun Seeds, Distorted God and others. Vasily Velichko never dared to write a book about what he saw in Nazino. During the 1989 expedition, members of the Memorial Society in Tomsk performed a so-called passportization of Nazino Island. The information about this place was entered into the registers of the Ministry of Culture, and since then the island has been a historical heritage site in Russia. "We are trying to keep the memory of the events of 1933 alive," says Valeria Shtotolkin, the head of Nazino rural settlement. "Last year we collected donations and began building a church dedicated to the innocent victims of the Gulag. Now the church is almost ready. Every year in June we lay a wreath at the cross, which has been standing on the island since 1993. But this time it did not work, the water is high, and the island is flooded almost entirely. The annual floods of the river that wash away traces of human presence on the island seem to be a metaphor for what happens to human memory. For the residents of Nazino, these events have probably become matters of the past, haven't they? You could say that. If no one reminds you of it, everything is forgotten. I'll go to school today, to the summer playground, and tell the kids about the island." If you were interested, thank the author by putting a like. And also do not forget to subscribe so as not to miss the outputs of even more interesting videos of my channel. Turn on notifications by clicking on the bell and share this video with your friends. What else interesting can you add to this video? Write in the comments, it will be interesting to read.